Hello, welcome to Field Live 2021. My name is Jim Kobe. I'm an assistant professor of English here at IU Kokomo, and I'm editor-in-chief of Field. If you're unfamiliar with Field, it is IUK's Journal of Arts and Sciences, and it highlights the works of our students here. Now, let's hear from this year's executive board.
Hello everyone, this is Mary Hogsett, Managing Editor for Field, and I am so excited to be sharing with you some of the most outstanding works from last year's publication. I am a junior here at IUK and I'm a double major in English and psychology. I love reading and writing, and so I am very excited and happy to be a part of this year's board. As I have a background in writing, I hope to support this year's volume of Field by encouraging students on campus to submit their work and produce the best writing they can. In addition, I would like to expand the research that is published, and I hope that we see more science and STEM majors submitting their research this semester.
Hi there, my name is Brenna Titano, and I am currently serving as Field Associate and Copy Editor. I'm a double major studying English with a focus in language and literature, as well as secondary education with minors in history and creative writing. In my spare time, I like to read and write pieces discussing morals and religion. The thing I'm most excited about in regard to working with Field is creating a space for students' voices to be heard and helping students realize their goals.
Hello, my name is Levi Haney, and I am this year's Art Director for Field Volume 7. I am super excited to be in this role, and I think it's going to be an amazing experience. A bit about myself: I am a senior majoring in new media, art, and technology with a minor in psychology. And some of my hobbies include playing board games and video games, and I'm a big lover of movies. I got involved with Field through last year's art director, Drew Terrell. I loved the work she did with last year's journal, and I knew it would be something that I would enjoy a lot. I think what I am most looking forward to is seeing all the amazing pieces that people come up with this year and seeing the journal come together with all those pieces.
We are so excited to bring to you live readings of selected works from Volume 6 in our second Field Live podcast. These contributors will be discussing the inspiration behind their pieces as well as performing them for you.
And now, we'd like to introduce our first contributor, Hannah Harrell, who will be discussing her art piece, Floating, which, if you're following along on Volume 6, can be found on page 42.
Hi, I'm Hannah Harrell. I'm currently finishing up my junior year at IU Kokomo, so next semester I will be a senior, majoring in biology and double minoring in psychology and chemistry. In this volume of Field, I have a mixed media art piece on page 42 titled Floating. I made this piece with my grandma when lockdown and quarantine was over last year. We do a lot of art together, and she has always inspired me to be so creative and just love art and painting in general. So she had got these new powders called Magicals that were meant for watercolor paper, so we wanted to test them out, and the result was kind of an accident, but it was really cool in the end, and I'm glad that the editors also liked it. So we used the watercolor paper, which has a different texture than regular paper, and we put some of the powders on there of different colors, just a few scoops, and then sprayed water on it and let the colors run together and kind of run off the page and mix. And then I used stencils of, like, there's lines and a paint splatter and a clock and some other circles, and I put gesso on top of the stencils, which is kind of like a putty material, and it ends up drying with a 3D look. And then I decided to paint some white circles in there of various shapes, and they reminded me of bubbles, so that's why I titled it Floating. Thank you for listening.
Our second presentation comes from Alex Townsend, who will be discussing and reading from his short story, Night of the Mechanical Apex, on pages 51 through 56 in Volume 6.
Hello everyone, my name is Alex Townsend. I'm a 20-year-old sophomore here at IU Kokomo, and today I would like to tell you a story. But before I can tell you the story that was submitted into the field, I would like to reciprocate that story with one of how I got here. Or more importantly, how my story got posted and published. About a year ago, during the spring semester of 2020, I was a freshman here, and I took a creative writing course under a professor named Carla Staus. One of her assignments, which was like mid-semester, went something like this. Post a story, a gripping story, in 2,000 words or less to the field, and hopefully one of you makes it. Well, to be honest, we were all kind of nervous about that. Knew about the field, we knew what was capable, but honestly, all of us were a bit nervous about the feeling of rejection of not getting a story published to begin with, but we all needed the grade, so we didn't have much of a choice, so we went for it. After about a week or so of editing, typing, and cuts, I eventually came out with a story that came to be known as Night of the Mechanical Apex. Now, to be perfectly honest, it's not some of my best work. Honestly, I could have written a lot better. I needed something to post anyway, and she seemed to like it, so I posted it anyway. Excuse me. That class was about a year ago, and the fact that story is now in the field in their Volume 6 edition absolutely blows my mind. I had no idea that I was even going to be getting this far, and to think that my work is along there with some of the other people who've poured a lot more time and contribution into this thing than I have. It's honestly kind of cool to see that something I wrote is published among one of the biggest publishing names in IU Kokomo. So, I personally want to thank the field for publishing my story, even though it's, like I said, it's not some of my best work, but I want to thank you guys for publishing my work and asking me to be a part of the podcast. And then I also want to take a time and moment to thank my professor, Carla Staus, who made me swallow my nerves for a second and made me post something that I didn't think was any good, but ended up being something bigger. So, for today, this story reading is dedicated to the professor who made me take a chance with this. So, without further ado, I would like to read you the intro to my story, Night of the Mechanical Apex. Vanessa and her assistant Bethany tore through the hallways of the laboratory, refusing to look back. The two scientists panted and suppressed a scream as an ungodly roar echoed behind them. They quickly ducked into one of the chemical closets and slammed the door shut. Vanessa locked the door, poured some sulfur powder under the door, and shoved a metal shelving unit in front of it before crawling quietly over to Bethany. She cradled Bethany in her arms, like a mother comforting a frightened child, and covered her mouth to silence her. She stroked Bethany's hair to not only calm her, but herself as well. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Suddenly, a massive shadow slinked by the door, as if searching for something. Vanessa and Bethany stayed utterly still as the shadow approached the door. They could hear it take a sniff at the bottom of the door, recoiling from the smell of the sulfur. It began walking away, bored, gradually getting thinner and longer before finally disappearing down the hallway. When she was sure the creature was gone, Vanessa turned towards Bethany and gave her a stern look. Now, you're going to quietly explain to me why my experiment, which I gave you explicit orders not to disturb, looks nothing how I left it and is now trying to kill us both. Got it? She asked in a hushed voice. Unfortunately, as gripping as that intro is, that is unfortunately all I'm going to be reading for you today, but I would like to take the time to thank you guys, actually, for listening into this podcast. I know that this year and last year were very difficult times, and I know that we've been put through a lot, but you guys have been responding to everything rather well, actually, so I want to thank you guys for listening in and finding a new way to enjoy this moment of awkwardness in our lives. Not that college isn't awkward enough, but a pandemic doesn't sure make anything better. But I would also like to thank the field once again for publishing my story and also coming up with this podcast system, which not only gives everybody a chance to enjoy the field in a new format with videos and music, but also a chance to give everybody a chance to listen and read to these stories, even if they don't pick up a copy of the book. So, like I said, if you want to read more of my story or go check out somebody who made a really cool piece of art or wrote a better story than mine, there's always a copy of the Volume 6 edition of the Field somewhere on campus, so thank you guys so very much for listening, and I hope all of you have a really good day. Thank you.
Our final presentation comes from Savannah Cooper, who will be reading her short story, The Fae Folks' Guide to Wooing Women, found on pages 36 through 41 of Field Volume 6.
Hi everyone, my name is Savannah Cooper. I am a senior at iuk.edu, majoring in English and minoring in communications. After graduation, I'm hoping to eventually go on to get a master's in English with the goal of working in editing or publishing. For Volume 6 of Field, I wrote a short story titled The Fae Folks' Guide to Wooing Women. I originally wrote this piece for a creative writing class I was taking, and my goal going into it was that I wanted to do kind of a comedic take on the Fae folk mythology. I've always found it really interesting. There's a lot of old stories about like the Fae kidnapping children or young women. So I wrote this story as kind of a fish out of water, funny take on a Fae prince who tries to do that with very mixed results. At the fresh young age of 621, Fae Prince Bay didn't know much, but something about snatching a wife from the mortal realm still sounded a bit off. "Are you certain this is the best way to procure a wife, father?" he asked, a rare line of concern crinkling his magically perfect skin. His father shook his head and smoothed his white beard flat against his star-colored robe. "My son, someone who failed at courting his own kind shouldn't argue against the ancient traditions. Considering the excellent example your brother has set, I don't know why you would question their ability to woo a feeble-minded mortal woman." Bay flushed red at his father's words. It wasn't his fault Lady Glemma had rejected his invitation to the summer solstice, and laughed in his face in front of his father's entire court. Maybe there was something to father's advice after all. Bay turned to Cerdan, his older brother, who was reclined on a tree-grown settee with his arm draped around his human wife, Alice. "Did the ancient traditions succeed in wooing you, Sister Alice?" Alice muttered a string of harsh-sounding human words beginning in F and B. Bay blinked in confusion. He was knowledgeable in several mortal tongues, but had never been taught those words. "I'm afraid I don't understand, dear sister. Could you translate it from your human tongue?" Alice jabbed a finger and opened her mouth to speak, only for Cerdan to cut her off. "They're merely words of affection. Isn't that right, darling?" he asked, leaning closer, only to be poked in the eye by one of the spikes of her crown, jutting out from her dark curls like a thorny hedge. Alice smirked and made a strange gesture with her middle finger. Bay opened his mouth to ask what it meant, but decided against it. Most likely another sign of affection. Would he and his own wife do it someday? "Assuming you're even able to find one," he reminded himself. Alice hiked up her expensive, shadow-woven dress and flounced out of the room, tossing a few more human words his brother's way. What a moody species. "Now, my son, your embarrassment at the summer solstice was bad enough," his father said. "Follow the traditions to the letter and try not to bring any more shame upon our household." Bay stared at the ground and nodded dutifully. If someone had bottled rot and ruination, stirred in a pinch of death, and then strained it through woven irritation, then it might have come close to capturing Bay's first scent of the human realm. He stepped out of the tree's portal and watched the trunk roll back into place, while trying not to think about the matching rolling of his stomach. How did anyone here accomplish anything without gagging to death? After taking several shallow breaths to calm his insides, Bay tugged on his natural magic and shifted into the form of a dog. His now furry nose nearly hit the ground as Bay stumbled over his new feet before finding his bearings. "A total success, father. I had no trouble entering at all, father," Bay thought. Better to plan out his successful return ahead of time. He trotted to a nearby stone-like pathway that cut through a forest neater than his father's garden. Trees and bushes stayed in their separate domains, and tiny garden flowers were lined up like soldiers in between them. Bay flicked his new tail and made his way down the path, alert to any potential candidates. The tradition was simple. Find a girl, whisk the girl back to his realm, tell the girl using small words that she'd been given the honor of marrying a fae, and spend the next millennium basking in the human's odd expressions of gratitude. Very simple. Quite simple. No reason for him to mess this up. Continuing along the stone path, Bay passed a human family leaving the area. A mortal child waved at him. How civil! Greetings to you as well, he answered, waving his tail in place of his hand. The little girl's mouth opened in a tiny O before she ran off to her mother, jabbering about talking dogs. That was when he saw her. She was sitting on a bench, a large book in her hands, and a wisp of brown-red hair sweeping across the furrow of concentration on her forehead. The scent of death and mortality clung to her less strongly, although it was still mixed with a strong dose of irritation. She reached into a bag beside her and popped a handful of hard candies into her mouth. Ah! Bay's ears tilted up. He knew that candy. The colorful ones, with the little human letters written on them. Uncle had brought him a satchel of them once. He'd eaten them all in one sitting, which in hindsight hadn't been his greatest idea. This idea, however, was perfect. He liked books, she liked books. He liked that candy, she liked that candy. Bay trotted over to the girl, the announcement of their impending nuptials on the tip of his tongue. You're a cute little fellow, aren't you? Good boy. She scratched Bay behind his furry brown ears. Oh, right. Dog. The M&Ms are all mine, but I think I've got half a sandwich left in here. Tradition technically dictated that he take her back home first, before explaining their engagement. Mortals were so easily confused by things that they couldn't see. Yet their meeting was going so well. Bay drifted into imagining arriving home and smugly telling his father and brother that his future bride hadn't needed such a precaution. Making a decision, Bay released his hold on his magic and shifted back. Fur and paws fell away from him like an actor casting off his cloak. He rose to his full princely height and launched into the speech he had carefully prepared to be even better than his brother's had doubtless been. Fear not, fair mortal maiden. After our nuptials we will share our love as well as human candies. I am Prince. One moment he was proposing to his future bride, who was struck silent with delight just as father had said she would be. And the next she was jerking a strange vial out of her satchel and spraying him in the eyes with something that burned worse than dragon fire. Certain told him that no true prince would ever scream in pain and terror. So, Bay screamed in whatever wasn't pain and terror. Oberon's beard, what foul potion is this? He shouted, rubbing at his eyes desperately. You're a guy. The woman jumped up from her bench, still holding the accursed potion in front of her. Precious candy scattered across the ground like the gems Lady Glemma discarded from her dresses whenever she grew bored of them. Bay's eyes watered horribly. He rubbed them again and stumbled backwards. His feet tangled in the long, golden-green robe he'd snuck from his taller older brother's closet for the occasion, sending him toppling to the ground in an unprincely heap. That did it. Tears, real tears, not potion-driven ones, poured from his eyes as he hiccuped and snotted into the sleeve of Cerdan's best robe. Somewhere in between calling himself a fate's cursed idiot and a troll-trampled waste of space, the mortal's voice cut through his mental flagellation. You've really lost it this time, Avery. Hey, are you okay? Bay glared at the woman. None of your concern, mortal, he said through a hiccup. Avery tightened her grip on the potion and glared right back. You're the one popping out of a dog and stumbling around like a Lord of the Rings reject. I don't know what drugs you're on, but you need to quit. She paused, raising the potion slightly as he stopped rubbing his eyes. Why did your eyes stop burning? My family has never rejected a title, and we Fays are impervious to weaker magic. He snapped back, finally able to see again. Bay's own pointed ears betrayed him, cringing back at how whiny he sounded. He buried his wounded dignity by finishing off Cerdan's robe with a blow of his nose. This is all your fault, mortal Avery. If you'd followed the ancient traditions... Listen, buddy. I'm trying to pass my midterms. Is this Emily's idea of making fun of my fantasy book collection? Just because she never studies doesn't mean she gets to interrupt. I do not know your enemy, Emily, he insisted, while keeping an eye on that evil potion. I was simply trying to honor you and fulfill the ancient traditions of the Fae. Now, I've gone and ruined it all, and I'll have to go home and tell Father and Certain that I messed up again, and... He broke into another sob. Avery fell silent. Bay buried his head in his knees, only looking up at the sound of her dropping to the ground in front of him. She held out a handful of M&Ms. You want one? Bay begrudgingly accepted all of them. You're really serious about this thing, aren't you? The spikes of green in her eyes had smoothed once more. Normally I'd say that makes you crazy, or me crazy for seeing you. You did almost give me a heart attack by turning into a guy, though, so that counts for something. An undignified guilt burnt in Bay's chest worse than the potion. Sorry for startling you. I think spraying you in the face makes us even. What are you doing here in the first place? Avery asked, her face curious and open, not mocking like his brother's would have been. Fulfilling the ancient tradition. I got that part. Avery ate another M&M. By taking a mortal woman like you home to be my wife. She nearly choked on the candy. You can't do that. Why? He asked. It's a great honor. It's because you can't just go around snatching people. They have lives, families, exams to pass. You don't even know me, Avery insisted, reaching for her potion again. We would have had centuries after our wedding. I'm sure eventually we would be giving each other common human symbols of affection, such as this. He made the gesture Alice had done earlier. That's not affectionate. Avery crinkled her nose in a charmingly mortal fashion. You show it to people you dislike. Bay blinked in surprise. Had Certain been mistaken? If whisking away, kidnapping, Avery corrected, isn't an appropriate form of courtship, then what do you prefer I do? Avery flushed, grabbing more M&Ms from her bag and pouring them in her mouth like a drunkard would his bottle. I don't know, get a coffee, see a movie? What is that? Bay asked, using her distraction to snatch a few more candies. It's like a play. You watch it, eat some popcorn and M&Ms, that kind of thing. Bay mustered the remains of his princely decorum and rose from the ground. Then we shall do that. Since you do not approve of my people's traditions, I will woo you using the ancient mortal ones of movie plays and M&Ms. Bay paused, abandoning decorum to rub his neck nervously. If you find that agreeable? Sure. I don't think I could study after this anyways. Avery stood, and to Bay's relief packed her potion away. Excellent. Bay shrugged off Certain's ruined robe and stepped back onto the stone path. My lady? Avery cringed. Okay, call me that again, and I'll give you another spray in the face. Avery? He corrected quickly. Yeah? I don't know how to find a play movie. She sighed. You better be worth me losing study time.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to our second ever podcast edition of Field Live. If you'd like to be included in future editions of the Field podcast or the print issue, the first step is to submit. We'd love to review your art, design, short films, music, prose, poetry, creative nonfiction, comics, and research. You can find additional guidelines and submit your work at iuk.edu/field. If you have any questions or you would like to reach out, you can email us at fieldpub@iu.edu. That's fieldpub@iu.edu. Huge thanks to all of our contributors for this podcast: Mary, Brenna, Levi, Hannah, Alex, and Savannah. And special thanks to all of the artists who allowed us to use their music. You can find a track listing in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast or have suggestions for future episodes, please feel free to reach out. Until next time.